And we are live. How's it going, everyone? Pretty exciting guest today, building a music management simulation game on Solana. So there's a lot to unwrap here, but I think it's really exciting why this project chose the specific niche they did and how they look to apply open economies and NFTs to something like simulation. So they're really trying to make a mark on Web3. There's a lot to unwrap, but luckily enough today I'm joined by Corey and Nico, who are two co-founders at Blockstars. So amazing to have you guys on. How's it going?
It's going really well, thanks. Great to be here, and thanks for having us on the show.
Yeah, thanks for having us. We're excited to be here.
Definitely been super exciting. I know I've been seeing a lot of stuff about Blockstars. It seems like you guys have really been picking up steam, seeing you guys around in spaces. So excited to be on here and really just get an idea of what you're building and hopefully give the community a good idea what's going on. So I know I started with a little brief one-liner there, sort of taking bits and bobs from your documentation, but I'm curious to hear just from your guys' end, really what Blockstars is and the goal behind making it.
Yeah, that's a great question. So we are a kind of a veteran team of game makers. Corey and I met at Zynga back in the early days, making games on MySpace, Mafia Wars on MySpace when that was still a thing, when both of those things were still a thing. Then Farmville on Facebook Canvas. We were co-founders of a mobile gaming company pretty early on, back in 2013. And then we've been making voice games most recently before we got into blockchain gaming. And both of us been really excited about crypto and blockchain in general as kind of a new technology that is on the verge of mass adoption, but isn't quite there yet. And kind of the through thread or through line through our kind of joint DNA as a team is that we love building games and interactive entertainment at the kind of cutting edge of technology, right when it's kind of getting ready for mass adoption. We'd like to be early to a technology platform, or kind of a consumer shift, just like we were with Zynga and social networking, of course, mobile, voice, interactive voice technologies. So we are really, really excited about what we're working on blockchain, not just for ourselves, but just in general, because we do see Web3 as being a pretty transformative thing for the future. So why did we choose Blockstars? Why did we choose the management simulation genre? The answer is very simple. It's the economy stupid. The management sim genre, if you are familiar with it, or listeners and viewers are familiar with it, is essentially the management of a giant spreadsheet. It is there are varying degrees of nerdiness and spreadsheetness, if you will, for these types of games. I personally am a huge fan of a game called Football Manager, which I've been playing since 1992. It's a soccer management simulation game, and it's very, very nerdy. It's got a pretty steep learning curve. It's all about the stats. Every player has literally dozens and dozens of data points that you as a player need to analyze and figure out, okay, it's not so much about playing a game of soccer, air quotes here. It's about managing your team, finding the right players, scouting, having the training in place, and so on and so forth. So we're taking a lot of those principles from the management sim genre, and we're bringing it to blockchain, and we're bringing it to, we hope, a much more approachable genre, which is music, which is a theme I think that everybody can get behind. The whole world, the planet has music in various shapes and forms, and we are supporting lots and lots of different genres of music from the very beginning. 96 genres, actually. We have 12 top-level genres and then 8 subgenres within each one. So lots of choices for players to choose from. You can go with anything from electro dance all the way to reggae and hip hop, and even sought from the Middle East is one of our launch genres. So it's the economy stupid. Blockchain just makes economy management that much more interesting. It gives you a real stake in the game. You are playing. We don't call it play to earn, because that's not what we're trying to do. We're trying to do play and earn. It's really about the fun and the enjoyment of the game. We're not trying to create economic opportunity here necessarily, but we do believe that the time that you as a gamer, as a player, are putting into a game has value. And so that's why we picked the management sim genre. We do think it's just really well suited to blockchain, and happy to dive into any details there. But yeah, that's a bit of an intro on the team and why we went after the management sim genre as our first title.
Yeah, that was incredibly well put. And it's just great to see you guys come from a background of traditional gaming, building things via social apps, also voice recognition as well. It seems very interesting that we're seeing more and more talent from traditional gaming come into the blockchain space. And I think we're seeing multiple different things. You obviously have people that are coming in and trying to build massive AAA games. You also have people building indie games. And then you guys are also in here building a management simulator. I just want to stop here myself. And like, this is a genre I love. I can spend so much time playing these games. I think one of the most recent ones I played and that was pretty popular was the Game Dev Tycoon or something along those lines. So super exciting to see that. And it's interesting that you guys chose music because, like you said, Nico, I think it is something that is very universal. I'm curious, from coming towards this gaming background, I mean, you may have already started to answer this, but does the open economy, was there like a moment where it clicked, or is this just something where it makes sense that players should be able to have value, not necessarily make a career and get rich off games, but be able to have this transferable value? When did this really start to come to the forefront and you guys realize that this is what Web3 enabled, and it's more specifically what you guys wanted to do and that it was a valuable idea?
Yeah, that's such a good question. So, Corey and I have been working together across many companies for many, many years, and we have a weekly one-on-one, and we just, chat about whatever's on our minds. And, usually it's kind of, okay, what do we need the team to be working on, and what are the priorities? And other times it's just brainstorming and just kind of like, okay, wouldn't it be cool if, X, Y, and Z, right? And sometimes they're crazy ideas and they have no hope of ever seeing the light of day. Corey usually checks me when I come up with something completely nuts. Other times it's vice versa. But in one of our one-on-ones, I remember pretty vividly, actually, we obviously been in COVID. We've been, working from home. Corey made a move from California to Texas. And we both have our routines for when we're chatting with each other. And I remember very vividly a conversation when I was walking around my neighborhood. My routine is take the dog for a long walk in the morning, schedule some phone calls, try to be productive, spend that time talking to people and taking meetings. And we had a conversation where it's like, gosh, this is probably like early spring of last year.
Yeah.
Maybe March, April timeframe.
Yeah, almost a year ago.
Almost perfectly a year ago. And we started, we were watching obviously what's going on with blockchain, the rise of crypto. And like I said, we've both been interested in crypto for a really long time, mostly as speculators. I hate to call it investors because it's hard to invest in crypto. But, we both kind of got into crypto around 2015, 2016. So not super early, but early enough that it was like, okay, there's something here, but it's not quite ready for mainstream yet. And both of us had said in the past, like, gosh, like it would be so awesome to be building on blockchain technologies because it enables these really interesting, open economies and digital ownership and actual transparency, like all of the things that we're seeing happening now in various shapes and forms. And this conversation that we had, like, almost exactly a year ago was like, I think it's time, right? Like blockchain is coming. There is absolutely a moment in time here. And, we could be a part of this. We've been interested in this for a really long time. And management simulation, we literally talked about Football Manager at that time. Management simulation is just such a perfect fit for blockchain, this notion of open economy, the notion of true digital ownership, transfer value. That's really what management sim is all about. Like it's about, managing those assets, right? Those digital assets, making them more valuable, improving their stats, leveling them up, and then reaping the rewards of that work that you put in. And so, 1 year ago, almost to this day, probably, we had this conversation about we should go and build a management sim on blockchain. And fast forward a year, here we are. So it's just a really fun space to be in. I do wish we'd been a little bit earlier, but you know what? We're still so early. I think we all recognize how nascent this space is and how much there is still to be built. I mean, Greg, you said it yourself. We've got AAA studios looking at this. We've got indie developers. We've got really interesting business models emerging that are just only possible on blockchain, are not possible in the free-to-play world or the packaged goods console gaming world. So hopefully that answers the question. But it's been a journey. It's been a year, and it's amazing that we've actually kind of landed pretty much where we hoped we would land at least at this point in time. Obviously, still a lot to be built. But just a really great journey together to get to this point.
Yeah, go ahead, Corey.
I was just gonna say, I think I would add, to your question too about like when did we realize that it was a good fit. I think, like Nico said, we had that conversation, but I think we had realized sometime before, just as gamers, that like I think it's always been true. I think you can see examples. The Diablo 3 real money auction house that Blizzard tried, that highlights that the balance is really important. I think we're going to talk about that later. But there's also like EVE Online with ISK and Plex being able to sell that for real money. Magic the Gathering, where your physical paper cards have value, and that's been true since 1994. Like, I think this notion of like having value in the real world for the time that you put into your games, and that other people value that too. Like, that's been around for a long time, right? Even chess sets from 1,000 years ago are really valuable to people, right? So I think that idea has been kind of underlying human culture for a long time. So for us, it was really not so much like, oh, I wonder if this is a good fit, and more like, hey, is it time? Like Nico said, like, is it the right time for video games, for us as video game builders to jump in? And so that's what's exciting, is like, yes, it's finally time. We've been watching this, like Nico said, for over 5 years, and it hasn't been time, but now it's time. So
yeah, I think that makes a ton of sense. And in general, it's just an opportunity. As you put, Corey, a lot of this value is already accruing in ecosystems. It's now just making it the ownership clear, and also just overall reducing the friction, not having to jump on all these different gray markets, just having a clear path where the value can be transferred if users want to, and then also depicting that ownership in a different way. To pivot here a little bit and get more into the nitty gritty, I think a big thing, that basis that you guys have set, is that a management simulator is a great foundation to have something like an open economy. I'm curious what the game mechanics and loops that people can expect, for maybe people who aren't too familiar with simulation games. How can they expect to level up in advance, and how will things like NFTs and the tokens be involved in this? This is a pretty loaded question, so we can start more overhead, and then I can see if I can pick some things apart and ask some questions. But overall, what are like the game mechanics and loops that people can expect, and how will this idea of the blockchain be hooked up to them?
Yeah, so that is a very loaded question. It's a question we could spend a long time talking about, but I'll try and be as tight as I can, and then we can kind of unravel any part that is interesting or we want to go a bit deeper on. Definitely. So at its core, Blockstars, that's the name of the game. Blockstars.gg is the website where you can go check out kind of the starting point, your hop-off point, if you will. The Blockstars themselves are a collection of 10,000 rock stars on the blockchain, hence the name. They are 3D digital characters. They live on the Solana blockchain, hence we're on Solana News, of course. And they are musicians that have different skills. So you have vocalists, and you have guitarists, and you have bass players, and so on and so forth. Lots of different musical skills. And those different musical skills are minted at various degrees of ability. When we first minted the first 10,000. And those are actually still not exposed to the players. The cosmetic rarities have been exposed. And so you can go to How Rare and check out the Blockstar collection and see kind of what the rarities are cosmetically. The attribute rarities are going to map pretty closely to the cosmetic rarities, but there will be some surprises and some Easter eggs and some, unpackaging of some of the skills that will only happen through gameplay and over a longer period of time, not just immediately. That's part of the joy of a management sim, is discovery. It's the discovery of like what makes these characters tick and how do they work well together. You put the Blockstars together as a player. You're essentially in the role of a band manager, or kind of a music impresario, if you will, business person. And you are putting together these Blockstars into different bands in these different genres that I mentioned earlier. And you are essentially trying to create music. You're stimulating the music business, the music industry. And so you will practice your skills, either explicitly actually direct your Blockstars to train a skill, or you will also improve your skills through just playing the game. Different actions that you take will have different knock-on impacts as to how your character or your Blockstars will develop. You'll write music. You will record that music as a band. You will try to find block stars that are good complementary, have good complementary skills. Not every block star is going to be a superstar. So you'll have to think carefully about how you put the block stars together. And then over time, you'll be releasing music, promoting that music, packaging it into albums, and releasing it into the charts, singles charts and album charts, and essentially generating income. And that income is in the form of our gameplay token, which is called Roll. We're also we'll be launching later on this year, our governance token called Rock. So they're called Rock and Roll, having a little fun with that. And Roll is essentially earned through the in-game actions. And your job as the player, the music manager, band manager, is to try to maximize your income by taking the right actions in the game. And it's designed to have lots of, not just a single game loop, it's designed to have lots of secondary and tertiary game loops as well. For example, there's a gigging loop, so you can go and play concerts where fame, one of the attributes of the Blockstars, matters much more than it does when you're doing songwriting, for example. It doesn't matter how famous you are to write a great song. So there's lots of different ways to play the game as a player and lots of different ways to be successful. It is not a pay-to-win game. We hate pay-to-win games. The NFTs are designed to have value and to accrue value over time. So as you're practicing your skills, you're uncovering new attributes that are hidden initially. You as a player are essentially adding to the value, accruing extra value to these block stars. So there's lots of different ways to earn, so to speak, in the kind of gameplay. One is to improve your NFTs and make them better and make them more valuable to other players over time. We all know that some games some players are very time-rich, cash-poor, and you have the opposite, cash-rich, time-poor. So we want to absolutely support both types of gameplay. There's no reason that both types of gamers shouldn't be welcome into our ecosystem. You can, of course, also accrue value through earning Roll through the gameplay. And we are planning a exchange mechanism where you can exchange Roll for Rock, which is the governance token, which will be exchange traded in the future. So there's a direct way of kind of earning in that respect as well. I'll pause there just because I said I would be brief. That was about as brief as I think I could be. There's so many systems in this game that we're trying to launch relatively straightforward and simple, and we're trying to do an iterative game design and game development approach. We can talk about that as well, where we're releasing features as they're ready, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the entire game is reflected in those features. So over time, this game will grow and grow and grow in complexity and richness of experience. And we're happy to dive into those. My personal favorite big game loop, which is going to be in the future, but we're already planning for it, is the record label game loop, where you've progressed far enough as a player, where you've been successful with your bands, you've been successful with your block stars, that you are ready to actually manage other players' bands and other players' block stars as part of the record label ownership loop. And that's where things will be exciting and fun from the very beginning, but that's where things can get quite exciting, where it's an incredibly social experience where you're actually managing other players' bands. And that's a big part of what we're hoping for Blockstars. It's a very rich, very community-oriented, very social experience.
Yeah, that's awesome. And just to jump in here, Nico, you actually answered one of my next questions there with that record label loop, having this increasingly more social environment. That's something I've noticed in maybe not all simulation games, but most of them, they're very coned off, walled off. There's not too many social aspects. So seeing that you guys are planning for this bigger game loop is definitely interesting in my end. That was just like a small gripe I always had with simulation games. But overall, hearing the game mechanics, how it works, the idea of getting on the charts and being able to earn tokens, as you guys are saying, you put it out and laid it that a lot of these simulation games are like a massive spreadsheet varying on complexity. It seems like a great fit, kind of echoing what you guys say. I think the golden question here is, how does it look like? How do you guys tweak and make sure that the economy is balanced in these things? To my understanding, it's an ever-going sort of equilibrium you're looking for. How do these game loops, what gives you guys confidence that you guys will be able to keep this balance for the most part? And like you said, very important, keeping it enjoyable for the people who are time rich, cash poor, but then also vice versa on that spectrum.
Yeah, that's a great question. Corey has a lot of amazing thoughts on this from EVE Online. That's his jam, and of course the economy there. It's not a management simulation game per se, but the economy there is obviously absolutely critical. I have a lot of thoughts from just our general team's experience, managing game economies. We did a lot of. I was the general manager of Frontierville, which is one of the big Ville games at Zynga back in the day. It had a horseshoe economy and a coin economy. Horseshoes were the hard currency, coins were the soft currency. And then I was also GM of Zynga Poker, which of course is one ginormous economy that you have to manage as well. So we have and Sherry, who's our chief product officer, has a ton of experience working on these types of economies as well. We do believe that coming from the free-to-play world where you're managing a hard currency and a soft currency, that's kind of how we think about rock and roll as well. Like rock is the hard currency, roll is the softer currency. It's inflationary kind of by design, and rock is non-inflationary by design. And having an exchange mechanism between the two is it's a really great, like, being a game developer, free-to-play game developer, is a really great training ground for coming into something like blockchain and thinking about the token economies, especially a dual token economy that we're contemplating. So I'll let Corey get into the kind of nitty-gritty on EVE Online, just because there's some really great examples from there. And he and I have just nerded out over some of these over many hours of one-on-one chats that we've had over the past year in particular. But yeah, just in general, to answer your question, coming from the free-to-play game developer world and having managed lots of different game economies that have hard currencies and soft currencies and have inflationary pressures, Frontierville, I remember, was literally every single week there was like, oh my God, how do we introduce more sinks into this game? We have inflation problems. The real world has inflation problems. So these are not easy. We're not pretending that they're easy problems to solve. Axie Infinity has got the seasonal approach, which is, in my opinion, is quite smart, because every season they can then tweak, like, oh gosh, SLP has gotten a bit out of control. We're going to have to reprice it. We're going to have to introduce new sinks. We're going to have to reduce the earning capacity or potential of certain, game features. So this is going to be very much a challenge. We know that, but it's a challenge we feel particularly suited for, just coming from the background that we're coming from and having seen lots of different games with lots of different game economies that all are different, but all share that same commonality, which is, hey, inflationary pressure is a problem. Let's think about it smartly. But yeah, I think, Corey, I would once again love to hear some of the examples that you usually come up with from EVE Online in particular.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, Nico mentioned, EVE is traditionally thought of as an MMO rather than a management simulation game, but for the longest time, the derogatory thing you'll hear people say when they don't like EVE is that it's spreadsheets in space, right? It's like really, really pretty spreadsheets in space. And I think that is indicative of how serious the economy is, and that's a really core part of that game. And so, I was very fortunate to get to work with them at CCP back when they had an Atlanta office. This is over a decade ago now, which feels crazy to say, but it was always very core. And I played for a long time before and after that period as well. But this idea of the economy being, like I mentioned earlier, ISK is kind of their main in-game currency, but they have Plex, which are digital versions of the 30-day subscription they used to have. Now, I think now it's different, but back then you could exchange Plex both for ISK and for basically US dollars. So it was a very similar idea of, hey, you can extract real world value and you can effectively map an exchange rate for ISK to USD if you want to. And that made their economy balance and design really critical in the same way that we're talking about here. And the examples, it's more of a principle really that I would point to, where it's not like, oh, it's easy, you just do X. The principle is more like, the economy is a garden. I think we're seeing that right now with the Fed, the Federal Reserve, the US economy, inflation. Like, the world is always changing. It's dynamic, it's kinetic, it's not static. And so the economy is a garden. You have to go out and tend the garden. And some days that means pulling weeds, and some days that means watering, and some days that means planting, and then some days that's just like harvesting. It's just extracting value. Everything's all good. We're just going to look at the garden today. I think it's very similar here. So CCP employed a full-time real-world economist just to track day-to-day the economy and make recommendations for, do we need more asteroids, which is basically their faucets for resources and minerals, or do we need more sinks, where more opportunities for people to get their spaceship blown up? So I think it's going to be very similar for us, and we're very cognizant of that. from the get-go is like, this is going to be an ongoing iterative process. Nico mentioned that Axie uses seasons as a good opportunity and pacing for them to do this. I think for us, we're still discussing internally exactly what our pacing is going to look like. But what we know is that it's going to be constantly changing. That's actually one of the reasons, Nico mentioned we're doing this iterative development approach. And it's almost kind of like early access games on Steam, where it's like you can't play the final game yet. But again, like our reference points are games like Diablo 3, Football Manager, EVE Online. Most of these are more games as a service as well. Like the game is never totally done. When is World of Warcraft complete? Well, it's not. It's changing with every patch, right? So we view it as constantly evolving. We think this iterative development approach is good for that, because each time we're ready to release new stuff is also an opportunity for us to check in and make sure, like, is the economy still healthy? Do we need to make changes? The most important thing, I think, is not to blow your economy up, and to be really conservative and cautious in making changes and introducing new things, so that you don't have any like massive events happen in one day, right? That's really the important thing, I think, and we're very cognizant of that.
Yeah, and I'll just throw, if I may, throw a very quick, very concrete example of how this iterative game development approach and being conservative about the game economy is going to work, literally in the coming weeks and months. We're launching our first 2 game features, which are, again, not the full gameplay, but it is this starting point for actually earning and burning, right? We're introducing a feature pair that one is going to earn you roll, and the other one is designed to cost you roll, right? So you've got your inflow, which is inflationary, and you got your outflow or sink, which is deflationary. And we're very deliberately introducing them as an earn and burn pair. So busking, which is a kind of early game play feature that lets you kind of earn relatively small amounts of roll before you start getting into the album loop, the singles loop, the gigging, the record labels. And then practicing your skills is going to cost you. It'll cost you time, and it'll also cost you roll, because there's a minimum wage attached to each Blockstar, depending on what their skill levels are. So very early on, we'll be able to test out, like, okay, how is this kind of feature pair, earn and burn pair, working in managing the economy? Like, do we see player behavior gravitate towards one or the other? Or do they just care about earning? Or do they want to also balance it through, the burning and the practicing? And so we will be able to tweak that. To Corey's point, it's almost like an early access feature. It's like, hey, let's see how this works. We'll obviously test it internally first. We'll introduce it as kind of an alpha feature to some of our kind of earliest adopters. And then we'll roll it out where we're like, okay, we're now confident that this is a well-balanced feature pair that accomplishes the goal of what we're trying to do here, which is to not blow up the economy and to allow players to progress their characters, their Blockstars, at the right pace. Because all of these things have to work together. It's not just about the game economy. It's also about, okay, we don't want you to be able to level up your Blockstar in a day. Like, what's the point of that? Then you're done, right? So there needs to be that kind of aspirational progression for all of the game loops. And so that's how we're very tactically and, we can very concretely kind of point to, like, here's how we're thinking about doing these things.
Yeah, I think even just unwrapping this is great. You keep building on to, like, as you guys are discussing, I have a question, but you guys will get to it and answer it. But even just to start from the beginning, I think one of the biggest thing, as I've been talking and reading up more and just seeing how people are building these Web3 open economies, it's nothing brand new. That doesn't mean that, like you guys said, Nico and Corey, that it's necessarily easy, but there's lots of points where you can look back, especially within gaming, and see models that worked, also analyze them, what maybe didn't work. But I think what's most important is that you guys have lots of points, reference points, where you guys can look back and see things that worked, but also just understanding the fundamentals of having to constantly look for this equilibrium. Corey threw out the analogy of the garden. You're always going to have to tend to it, but there's different mechanics you can tweak and different loops that you can mess with to get certain outcomes. So I think that makes a ton of sense there. And the biggest thing is, like, we've seen this in games before, and it's not perfect, and it does probably get a bit harder when you start to open it up, but it's not like you guys are building from scratch here. There's so much reference points And it's something, even tying back to a couple questions previously, we've seen these values create in economies. I mean, you were even mentioning it, Nico, how when you were over at Zynga and building some of these other games, they had economies in them. So it's really nice for people that maybe aren't into gaming or haven't caught up that a lot of these things are going on. It's just now reducing the friction, and it does reducing the friction and adding an actual way to have value that is transferable. And it definitely does increase the risks and stakes, but it's been something that's happening. It's just taking it to the next level. To build on that some more, I think something that is really exciting how you guys are looking to do this is your iterative development stages, I think you called it, where you guys are looking to put out piece by piece. And I think this is twofold. One, as you guys said, really being able to test the economy and not blow it up, not spend an entire year building this loop and then putting it out and then having like a select amount of people just find a way to level up their character in a day. Like this will give you guys a testing environment, but then also not put way too many things out at once. Like it really does that. It also, I think, allows you guys to build your community and have them there to give feedback, which is massive on the Web3 aspects. I know you guys spoke on it a little bit, how there will be the busking feature. And I know you guys put out a medium release there. I'm just curious to poke a little bit more on what this iterative development will look like. So you obviously have the earn and burn feature that is coming up in the near future, but what are other, I guess the way I would think about it is just modules that you guys are looking to add on once you're happy with this earn and burn via busking?
Yeah, I think Corey would be perfectly positioned to speak about the iterative development process, given that he's our CTO and really owns this part of it. I'm happy to speak to some of the feature roadmap, but I think let's talk about the iterative development process first, because I think that's pretty core to who we are as a team. This is not something new for us. Like, we're not doing this because we're building on blockchain, or because the economy is more sensitive, because there's this real life value that's more tangible than perhaps with other games. But this is actually who we are. Like, we've always believed in shipping fast, shipping early, shipping often, and getting product in the hands of customers as early as possible. And really, like, for me at least, this comes very much from the Zynga days, where Zynga, was very much a pioneer, or one of the pioneers in this kind of, the notion of live ops, the notion of like shipping a feature or two even a week. Like on Frontierville, we shipped 2 features a week. We had a big and a small, Tuesdays and Thursdays. Sometimes it slipped to Fridays. That meant that engineers were working on Saturdays. But we don't want to go to that extreme. But it was like, that's literally what we were doing. We're shipping 2 features a week, and that was unheard of, or mostly unheard of, especially in game development at that point. And so it is kind of deeply ingrained in us that, we want to ship early and often, and we want to kind of minimize the risk of shipping by shipping relatively small pieces individually that then add up to a much bigger whole, much bigger kind of complexity over time. But you can manage it by being more contained with these individual releases. So philosophically, that's who we are as a team. And I'll just let Corey speak more to the kind of the nitty gritty, I guess, of how we are thinking about that from an engineering perspective and process perspective.
Yeah. I think, understanding what this iterative development means, it's helpful to kind of compare it to what it is not, and kind of how things used to often work. So, in game development and software development and in process management, there's been this concept for a very long time. You kind of going back to like 80s, 90s Microsoft era of waterfall development, where it's like you're going through these very large stages, and then at the bottom of the, at the end of the waterfall, it's like, okay, we've got this big release that comes out, like Windows 95. Next one will be Windows 98. Big milestones, big change sets, really exciting to announce in like a big like the Apple events that they do are still kind of in this way, where it's like the new iPhone's ready, big event, big chunk of new changes. Compare that to when we talk about this iterative development style. I like to joke with our team internally, for any software folks you have watching, like it's lowercase agile. So like there's this concept of agile development, all uppercase, that is, got scrum masters and formal sprints. And it's like, we're going to have a 2-week sprint, and we're going to cost everything in points because it's like distance, not time. And there's all these philosophies about what it means to move faster than waterfall. And that was kind of the big thing, like Nico mentioned, when we were at Zynga. that was the hot new process management thing. So for us, it's lowercase agile. Like we have 1 to 2 week sprints for our larger milestones that we're trying to ship. Our smaller stuff is shipping every day. And in software, that's typically referred to as like continuous integration and continuous deployment. So we can push a small code change live at any time of day. And that might happen, Nico mentioned earlier, like, oh, we might launch 2 features a week. And those might be noticed by users, user facing. But we might, with Blockstars, we might be shipping new code multiple times a day and just whenever we want, whenever we need, right? And the idea is, to use another analogy, like if you throw a giant rock into the pond, it's going to shake things up. It's going to be a big splash. It's going to be big waves. Other people in the pond will definitely notice. They might be disrupted. Maybe you threw that giant rock onto like something you didn't know was underneath the water in the pond. Maybe you've caused a much bigger issue and broken a pipe or something. And if we're just kind of putting pebbles or grains of sand out there constantly, we will eventually have the same effect of the water on the water level, but we're much less disruptive, right? And if we do hit something with a pebble, it's probably not going to break something as hard. We're going to figure it out faster, and we can throw another pebble in right after it, right away, because we don't have to like exert a ton of energy to lift these boulders each time, right? So that's like the analogy I would use for, we have a lot of different internal environments for testing different features at the same time. We can see the impact they're going to have. Like Nico mentioned, we're working on with Solana DevNet having an equivalent of all the Blockstars that we could potentially have our community come and test with for our origin holders. And by doing all these things, we can have a lot more confidence. It's kind of a virtuous cycle. It's like you ship smaller things, so they have less impact. So you can have more confidence to ship more smaller things even faster, right? That's the general idea. Now, that's super reductive. I made it sound really easy. It is not actually that simple in practice, nor is it that easy. You hear us talking about practicing and busking, like those are fundamentally bigger features. And we're not just like shipping, small little chunks of practicing and busking every 10 minutes. So, there are limits to this approach, but the principles are what we view as being important. It's like, hey, what is the smallest chunk that we could reasonably call practicing and busking? Let's get that out first, and then let's iterate on that.
Yeah, that context makes a ton of sense. I also think it's great to hear coming from something like Zynga, how this innovative process of shipping in smaller sets can be better than this idea of a waterfall. And I think coming into a landscape where you are dealing with something like an open economy that's fairly delicate, like those ideals and principles just magnify and give good leverage, especially in such a nascent early space. You guys don't want to go exert years of work to drop a waterfall update and then have it not fit well in the ecosystem. Yeah. I know another project that is taking this sort of development process is Mini Royale, and it seems to be great to get feedback in. Like you said, it's this virtuous cycle of building confidence. It's also not like you have this crazy thing building behind the scenes that the community is not seeing. Once you get it out there and you're shipping updates, you constantly have this pulse on the community as well. And this wants to take me to my next questions. I have a few more getting down to the bottom here, but there's a couple different ways to go here. I know you mentioned Solana DevNet. I think it would be fun to stick on this just since we're still in the development talks of things. I'm curious, how did you guys come down to Solana? It looks like you guys were looking and weighing a couple different options. And then another sort of two-part question, how has it been working in the ecosystem? I know it's very early developing on Solana, but it also seems like the ecosystem is quick to jump in and help. So a little two-part there. Why Solana? How has it been actually being in the trenches on something this early as well?
Yeah, I can kick that off, and then I know Corey's obviously got the deeper thoughts, the technical thoughts on this. But we mentioned the kind of the origin story of me and Corey talking about this last March. By summer, we got the whole team together for the first time, since the pandemic started in person here in the Bay Area, and we basically spent an entire week kind of brainstorming, like, hey, how do we do this? What are our philosophies? How do we want to build this? And where do we want to build? That was an important question too. It's all very well and good saying, hey, we're building on blockchain. But actually, which blockchain? And if you're building on Ethereum, who are you partnering with as a layer 2? And so there were a lot of questions and open. Things were moving very quickly. They still are moving very quickly. It's kind of like building on quicksand. That's one analogy. And the other is, we're all kind of building the plane while it's flying, right? That's the other analogy. And that's all very true. And things will change very quickly. But the reason we landed on Solana after a very extensive process of looking at a variety of different, pretty much all of the other options, Solana at that time, this is probably about September, October time, when we landed on Solana for sure. Number one, they had very, very explicitly come out at that point and said, hey, we believe that gaming is one of the big on-ramps for the mass market when it comes to new technologies, and blockchain is no different. And as we discussed at the very start of this broadcast, that's very much 100% aligned with our DNA as well. Like, we fundamentally believe that gaming and interactive entertainment is one of the ways that the mass market is going to adopt new technologies because it's fun, it's easy. Like, nobody wants to, and Corey's got some great analogies here from, like the early days of gaming when you had to, do the LAN parties and, like you had the hardware piece to figure out, like, there are a lot of hoops to jump through to get involved with blockchain. It's not easy. It's not simple. It's not straightforward. If any of us, I know I'm included in this, have tried to explain, like, oh, here's how this works on blockchain. Like, here's how you get your wallet and you go download it here. And, oh, it's a Chrome extension, by the way. And like, oh, okay. Yeah, you got to write down your seed phrase and put it on a piece of paper. So you don't and the average person just doesn't get it. Right. And it's hard to adopt a new technology at the best of times, but it's particularly hard when there's like so much value locked in to blockchain, like real world value, actual monetary value. So Solana was just very explicit at the time, in that kind of September, October timeframe, where they were like, look, we believe that gaming is going to be a huge use case. It's going to be the on-ramp for the mass market. And it just resonated really strongly with us. So that was number one. Number two, of course, speed and fees. Those are obviously obvious ones. We don't need to dive into those super deeply. That was a big deal. It kind of eliminated the need for a layer 2, and you can just go build directly. And number three was actually is a great lead into your second part of the question, which is the relationship. When we got, which is not to say we're not knocking anybody else out there that we spoke to. We had very good conversations, and it was very, everybody was very supportive of obviously developers coming to their ecosystem, but Solana just really went above and beyond, in my opinion. We had a Slack set up literally the same day that we had our first introductory call. They made their engineers available to us immediately. I think our shared Slack now has something like 6 or 7 or 8 people in it. So different, disciplines, we can ask questions at, any time of day. Introductions at the highest levels to, other Solana ecosystem partners. It's a very much a kind of a rising tide lifts all boats mentality, I think, in Solana. And not just Solana itself, but all of the Solana ecosystem. That is how we have felt, where it's like, hey, we have felt super supported. You mentioned, many nations, Alex Paley was one of the first people that Colleen over at Solana introduced me to say, like, hey, talk to Alex. He'll tell you what the experiences was of working with us, getting stood up on Solana. And Alex made himself available immediately. We had a phone call scheduled for that week. We had a second phone call follow-up for the following week. And that's just how it's been building on Solana. So as a business person, as a product person, as a designer, like, it just feels really good to be supported. And then, on the technical side, I'll let Corey speak to that. But yeah, those were the kind of 3 primary decisions that we made and said, look, these guys are standing above everybody else on these factors. We feel like this is a risk, because it's still a risk, right? We're all taking risks because we're also super early, in all of blockchain. It was a risk that we felt, like, okay, we can bet the company on this, right? We can bet the future of Blockstars, bet the roadmap on working on Solana and making this the bet that we're kind of making as a foundational one.
Definitely.
Yeah, I think similar from the technical side as well. I think that there are very high level advantages just to being on an L1 and not on an L2. There's nothing wrong with like ZK rollups or any of these other approaches that L2s are taking with something like Ethereum. We talked to a lot of those folks, but I think that philosophically and in practice, when something goes wrong, which it will, it's just the nature of a blockchain distributed network protocol. Then it's like you have two different things you need to now consider and look at and understand deeply in order to figure out what the root of your problem is, right? You have the L1 that you still need to understand pretty deeply in some cases. And then you have the L2, which you also now need to understand potentially pretty deeply to understand what's going on, right? And so it's a broader set of knowledge that you need to familiarize with. And so that's, I would say, a disadvantage with L2s. So that's at a high level. And then if we say, okay, L1s have this advantage, then the next question is like, okay, which of the L1s is best from a technical perspective? And I think with Solana, there's a lot of advantages. I would definitely echo what Nico said, just from more of like a BD perspective and a relational perspective. Colleen's been great. Alex, many Royale Nations teams been great. Like all these folks have been good to work with. But then just on a purely technical level, it's nice to be able to build in Rust. It's nice for that to compile down to Berkeley packet filter. Like these are technologies and languages that have much broader ecosystems than just blockchain. So you compare that to Solidity, you compare that to a variety of Solidity spinoffs. Not to pick on Ethereum and the surrounding ecosystem, but really it's more that they've been so influential, right? So like EVM runs a lot of things now, not just Ethereum. And that means that Solidity and its spinoffs and clones run a lot of things now, but they still only run blockchain things. And that means that there's a benefit to the diversity of perspective and knowledge with Solana that you can get from all of the core technologies underneath, because they are core technologies that other people use too. Solana is still working on moving from UDP to Quick, which we're very excited about because we're cautiously optimistic that's going to help with a lot of issues that we're facing and everybody's facing. But Quick is used by Cloudflare, who we also use. Quick was invented by Google. So it's like the fundamental first principles approach that the Solana tech team is using, I think is the right one, right? And I think that it's, like Nico said, at the end of the day, you're always placing a bet. We have placed our bet. We feel good about it because it's the same kind of philosophy, and we're aligned not just in kind of the business theory that Nico mentioned of gaming as the use case and 1 billion plus people, but we're also aligned in kind of the technical philosophy as well. So there's a long way to go. It's kind of the meme, the mantra of blockchain that it's like, oh, it's early. I prefer not to say like, oh, it's early, but just to say like, there's a long way to go. Because I think that's the bigger thing. Like we could get there really fast potentially, as long as we're all aligned on what is necessary. And so that's where a lot of my focus goes, and a lot of my conversations with the Solana team and with others in the ecosystem is like, hey, this is what we think is important. DeFi, Serum, Radium, like they're doing super cool stuff. They may or may not think that's important like we do. So like, those are the sorts of conversations that end up really mattering, I think.
Yeah, that was very well put, and just outlining multiple things, right? I think a big thing is like low transaction or high speed, low transaction cost is very much the surface level, but you guys dove into two other things. The fact about how Solana is positioning in the idea of scaling and innovating on the technology standpoint. And that's always great to hear about, especially as like someone who's non-technical myself. Like it seems more and more, Corey, that the sort of what you outlined there of how they're aligning and using, even just starting out with something like Rust, but then looking to innovate and integrate, and then also just having a clear path on how to scale and leveraging some of the better, not to like be too polarizing, but some of the better technology that's out there. And then also the other side of the ecosystem and the business development, and how the rising tide really is lifting all boats. I think something I was discussing with someone the other day was that there's obviously competition within the space, but it's not anything that's crazy where other projects don't want projects to succeed. It's more so, of a friendly competition, because the pie is growing so rapidly, everyone has a angle and a way they can grow it and really be involved. So things like Alex Paley at Mini Nations, he's willing to jump on and really help guide. And this is very similar throughout the ecosystem, just outside of these couple anecdotal things where people are willing to jump on and help, even though inherently, if you look at it, it's there's a long way to go. And in most cases, like, there is a lot of inherent competition, but it doesn't seem to matter because there's so much growth to be had that it's just going to lift everybody up, and people recognize that. So I think that's just amazing there. And it was a great elaborate answer on why Solana that goes deeper than just transaction speed and fees. So I think that was very thoughtful, and it makes sense, especially when you're choosing something like, where do we want to build this game that we will be shipping developments for easily the next 5 years for, is incredibly important to have these fundamental reasons why you chose it. I'm getting down to the bottom here. I have a hard stop at the hour, but I have a couple questions that we want to squeeze in here. The big one that we can spend a little bit of time on, I'm just curious, obviously in gaming, like, a strong community is so incredibly important. Has that been amplified coming into Web3? Has it been a little bit different? The biggest thing that comes to my mind is you guys maybe get a lot more when update, when this, but I think that's similar traditionally. So I'm just curious, like, community is obviously so incredibly important in traditional gaming. How is that translated over, amplified, or what is just the general sentiment of being in Web3 now, where people are very much involved at a grassroots level?
Yeah, that's such a great question, and this is we are not going to do justice to this question in the few minutes that we got left here. But yeah, fantastic question. It has been amplified 1,000-fold, and I think there are a number of reasons for this, and I don't have a tight, crisp answer for this, so I'll try and be concise and just kind of give you my thoughts here as they come in raw. But one of the big things I think that is driving the community involvement and just the community dynamics, let's start with that community dynamics, which is heavy involvement, which is really kind of a very close attention, paying very close attention to what the dev team is doing and what's going on, is the financial element, right? Like, if a lot of projects have launched, including ourselves, with a collection of NFTs, and people are putting real money behind it. They're buying NFTs, and that comes with expectations, right? As game developers, we've always prided ourselves on like trying to do right by the gamer, doing right by the player. But in free to play, like, the dynamics are that 97% of the players are playing for free and 3% are payers, right? Here, 100% of your players are payers, right? At least until we launch a free-to-play version. But as of right now, our community, and I think the communities of many game developers and just NFT projects in general, is driven by purchasing behavior, and they are buying because they're doing their own research. They're looking at the white paper. They're looking at the team background, and they're saying, "Hey, I believe in these guys. I believe in this team." And that is a heavy responsibility. We do not take that lightly. We've never taken it lightly in our careers as game developers, but we are taking it particularly not lightly in this space, because we recognize how meaningful that community actually is. They're all putting their money where their mouth is. And so we recognize the importance of working with our community and trying to co-develop the product. And that's a lot of this, we talked about the iterative development process and shipping pieces when they're ready and getting feedback. Like, this all feeds into it, right? Like, so, business model, development model, community model, like, all of these things are driven hand in hand by the fact that there's just a lot of shared commitment for the future, for a long-term future, right? That's what we're hoping for, at least. We don't, every NFT project has its flippers and its investors and its, speculators and its players and those who value the utility. Like, different people value different things, but at the end of the day, like, a lot of that community dynamic is driven by the fact that there's just this incredibly close-knit commitment to the future. So that's the biggest thing, I think. If there's one takeaway for me that has really been amplified by blockchain and by how community works here, is that that element. And we, like I said, we take it very seriously. We take our responsibility to the community, to our players, to our investors, to everybody very, very seriously, and try to be as transparent as we possibly can. We are doing things we know differently to some other projects. We are, we're not going out there like, and again, this is not a knock on any other project. Everybody's doing things in their own way. But we try to just be honest and transparent about who we are and when we're ready to announce something, and not going through, empty hype cycles for the sake of going through empty hype cycles. We want to actually deliver something of real value whenever we announce something or we put something into the hands of our community. So I'll stop there, but that's the biggest thing for us. And it really, really resonates heavily with me every day. It's just amazing seeing our community. Final example. This is just an example of how powerful it can be if you do it right. And again, I don't know if we're doing it right, but we're trying to. We have community members who are running their own contests now, right? Like they're literally taking Blockstars that they own and roll that they've been earning through the airdrip, through the ownership of the Blockstars. That's what it conveys to you. That's the current kind of reward for owning a Blockstar. And they are running a contest, a giveaway contest, to bring new members into the community, to bring new buyers into the ecosystem, to bring new players to the game. And it's incredible to see, right? And I think that's what you can get if you are open and honest with your community, and you treat it as a co-development process, not a like, okay, we're the devs, we know best. And we hope to do a lot more of that, and we hope to see a lot more of that kind of bubble up organically. But yeah, I mean, having your own community literally like take the things that they paid you money for and then go run a contest as a giveaway, like that's just spectacular. It really is a wonderful thing to see. And it is not something I've seen very many times, at least not at this level in my career. And I've been making, games, and, this is my fourth startup. Like I've been doing this for a long time, and I've never seen something this powerful kind of bubble up organically through community. So that's my answer to that question.
Yeah, that was very well put. I think a big thing here is just understanding that, right? And as you said, it ties back into a lot of the other things you're doing, but understanding that this is sort of a fundamentally different dynamic where people are seeing the game Blockstars, they see the vision for it, but they're also taking the risk on it and putting their own money. The gamers are getting involved at a much more grassroots level than any time before. So while a lot of people can see like win token, win this, win update that, it makes sense from that person's view because they are inherently a lot more involved than in other spaces. So the fact that you guys understand that, and it's just part of it, and the iterative development process feeds into it and really does get these bite-sized chunks that it seems like, again, the space is so nascent, but it seems like this is what really the community values, is being able to be a part of it and see these things as they're incrementally updating and have some sort more voice than they maybe do in the traditional development process. And I think a lot of the things we went over highlights that, even just starting back from like the fundamentals of Web3 gaming and ownership and being able to transfer value is a lot of where it comes rooted. To really wrap things up, and this one is like the most open-ended question here. We can spend a little bit of time on it, but I think the fun and challenging part here is trying to condense this into something small, but it's what are the current thoughts on the Web3 gaming landscape? What are some things that you'd like to see? I think you hinted it at a little bit of like hype cycles being realistic and honesty. I think those are all really big things that resonated, but just curious if you could almost serve it up of like a view of what the Web3 gaming ecosystem, I think we did an amazing job of setting where its long-term vision is, what it does, but just currently right now, what are some things that you guys are looking forward to seeing improve in the future?
Gosh, where to start on this one? I mean, the list is very long. I would say at the very high level, we come from a world of most recently in the mobile gaming space, where mobile gaming has been around since the Apple App Store opened and the Google Play Store opened, and that's more than a decade now. I think 2009 was the Apple App Store, and so we're 13 years into that particular technology revolution and the ability to play mobile games on the go. And over those 13 years, an incredible set of tools has been built by other developers, right? And so, you don't have to do your own analytics. You don't have to do your own monetization. You don't have to do your own payments. You don't have to do your own, like the list goes on, right? Like there's just dozens and dozens and dozens of services that you sign up for that are just like, it's X as a service, right? And somebody has done the work for you. What currently does not exist in blockchain, and as a game developer is sorely, sorely missed, is that ecosystem of tools that makes your life as a game developer so much easier, right? Game developers, like everybody has their own specializations, right? And we are game developers, and we want to make games. We don't want to be building analytics tools. We don't want to be building monetization platforms. We don't, like there's so many things that just don't exist that we're so used to from the mobile gaming world that it is very, very sorely missed. Now I know it's coming, right? Like it's whenever there's a new technology revolution, which this really is, and Web3 is already bringing a lot of folks building these picks and shovels types companies, right? And so it's coming, but it's just not there yet. This is actually very reminiscent of early days of Zynga, back in 2008, 2009, like even pre-Facebook Canvas, where Zynga had to build its own analytics tools, right? We had our own thing, our own stat system called Z-Track, which was as a product manager, you'd go in the morning. It was good. It was better than anything else out there. But you'd go in the morning, you'd hit run on your 5 or 6 or 7 reports that you needed to look at: BAU, MAU, changes, monetization, pairs, new pairs, blah blah blah. And you'd run like you have 7 tabs open, and you hit run on each of those. And then you go to the coffee machine, and you grab your coffee, and you talk to your coworkers. 10 minutes later, you'd come back. Oh, the reports are still running. The queries are still running. You go back, you get your second cup of coffee, and you come back. And that's obviously super inefficient. But you need that data in order to develop, because otherwise you're flying blind, right? Like how do you make decisions if you don't know what you're looking at? Like otherwise you just, it's a hunch, right? And so that's really where we are. That's I would use that as the analogy for where we are in blockchain game development in general. Is there is a lot of flying blind. We're having to accept that there are certain things we simply cannot do unless we, build another company, spin up another company or a division of our company that would go ahead and actually do that analysis or, build those features or build those tools. And so that's where we are right now. It's both exciting and incredibly frustrating at the same time, because we are so used to, from the mobile gaming space in particular, to have this incredible wealth of tools that have been built by specialized teams that are perfect and have an incredible UX and incredible UI and are actually really cheap to use and run. It's a monthly subscription fee and it's relatively affordable. Sometimes it's just, individual dollars. That's just not available right now on blockchain. And as a game developer, that is sorely lacking.
Yeah, that is very well put. Not even something that I think that gives great insight for people who need to understand that there is a lot of infrastructure that still needs to be built, a lot of tooling where this is a big reason why things are taking a while. Like this is the first time that games are really interacting with the blockchain, and teams aren't able to just dive headfirst and, okay, I want to build this game. I'm going to use all the previous tools. There's some gaps that need to be filled in. So it's great getting insight on that. I think the best thing too is that there's a lot of people posturing towards this. We're seeing gaming on the blockchain, Web3 gaming, become more and more talked about, more funding going towards it. And then one of the best leading indicators is talent. We're seeing a lot of developers come into the space as well. So overall, I think for me, at least myself, that gives a ton of good insight. And that's something that's not just on the gaming side. This is across the entire ecosystem where people are looking for better tooling, and the general consensus is it's on the way. And I think just like anecdotally, seeing people that are coming into the ecosystem, participating at these in-person hacker houses, the talent, the development, while finding developers is hard, they're definitely scarce. There's a lot of talent gravitating towards Solana, and that will just be one of these things that starts to fill in these gaps of infrastructures, especially as even teams like yourselves or other gaming teams, some of these tools will just be something that you guys have to build and then potentially open it up, allow other people to use, and vice versa across the ecosystem. So it's just one of these things, like Corey was saying, there's a lot of things to develop and innovate on, but there's also a lot of innovation that makes building out this infrastructure worthwhile. So overall, I think that really wraps it up. We could definitely keep going here. I mean, there's certain things we didn't even get into, and I know as we move forward, it'll be fun to really dive into the nitty gritty game mechanics as that starts to get pushed out in incremental developments. And it looks like you guys are already working on that with the burn and earn feature. So that's definitely something to look out for. And I just want to cap it off here. We're definitely going to be keeping an eye out on Solana news, but want to just leave this for you guys to close up. Thank everybody who tuned in. And it was just great talking to you guys. Ton of really good insight. And it's awesome seeing people with experience like you come in and building in the space.
Yeah, thank you. And it's been great being on the show. Thank you very much for having us and allowing us to share. And yeah, if anybody wants to check us out, we're at Blockstars Game is our Twitter handle, and blockstars.gg is our website, which is kind of your entry point to our Medium blog and Discord and what have you. So yeah, definitely if you're interested, curious, hit us up. I'm at Nico the Finn. That's my handle. It's been my longtime gamer handle for literally forever. So I'm at Nico the Finn on Microsoft Gaming Services and on Twitter and elsewhere too. So and then I think at Corey Johnson.
Yeah, I was early on Twitter, fortunately. So
Nice.
I am at Corey Johnson on Twitter. Yeah, thanks again for everybody coming and watching. We really appreciate it. And like Nico said, come check out the Discord, check out our white paper if you want to know more. We'd be happy to chat.
Yeah, super exciting stuff, guys. We'll close it up here. We'll definitely be keeping our eye out. I mean, it seems like you guys are just really going to start ramping up this development, getting more and more. You guys have been hard at it for the past year and then brought a ton of experience. So we'll leave it there. I think it was super exciting, and we'll definitely have to catch up in the near future. We'll be looking out for your guys' next updates as well.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you, Greg.
Yep, definitely. Awesome. So I'll wrap that up real quick. I don't think there's too much more I need to add on. I think some of the biggest things is always seeing talent coming in from the traditional gaming space and really trying to lay out and understand what they're building and being realistic about it. I think there's lots of things we touched on with changes in Web3 gaming, specifically how involved the community is, but then looking how the team at Blockstars is building on some of these fundamental development techniques that they've taken and how they actually provide leverage in a space like blockchain, having incremental developments where, as Corey was saying, you can throw out pebble developments that maybe won't rock the entire ecosystem, but will allow you to make minute adjustments and really tend to the economy. So overall, I think we covered it all very well. I know some people just joined in at the end here, and there is a question we couldn't get to. I unfortunately have to hop off right now, but they said where to find them on Twitter, also the website. So I would encourage people to go there. And just want to thank everyone for tuning in. If you're still watching, go ahead and subscribe. Give it a retweet on Twitter. It'll give us a great gauge for how up to date we should stay on Blockstars. We'll definitely be keeping an eye on them as these developments come to light. So again, thank you, everybody.